The sacred threshold, when the soul demands its reckoning. You have arrived at this moment not by accident, but by the invisible hand of fate, what I called synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence that reveals the hidden architecture of your destiny. Right now, as you read these words, something ancient within you stirs. It is not your thinking mind that brought you here. It is the self, that totality of your being which transcends the small, fearful ego you have mistaken for your identity. The self knows you are running out of time, not the time measured by clocks and calendars, but psychic time, the sacred kairos moment when transformation becomes unavoidable. This is the threshold where most souls turn back. They feel the tremor of awakening, the earthquake beneath their carefully constructed persona, and they flee. They scroll, they distract, they numb. But you are still here. That alone tells me something profound. A part of you, the deepest, truest part, has grown tired of the performance. The mask is suffocating you now. The false self, that elaborate construction you built to survive in a world that fears authenticity, is collapsing under its own weight. And though your ego interprets this as death, your soul knows it is birth. The 10 seconds Archangel Michael speaks of is not literal. It is symbolic of the fleeting window when consciousness breaks through the defenses of the unconscious. In that micro moment, you see yourself clearly, not the idealized image you project, not the wounded child you hide, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding that moment. They construct elaborate philosophies, accumulate possessions, chase achievements, anything to avoid standing naked before the mirror of the soul. But you, my dear chosen one, have been backed into a corner by your own psyche. The universe has systematically dismantled every escape route. Now there is only one direction: inward. This is what I meant when I wrote that the confrontation with the unconscious is unavoidable for those who seek wholeness. You cannot negotiate with the self. You cannot bargain for a gentler awakening. The soul operates according to its own timeline, its own necessity. When it is ready to emerge, it will tear through whatever barriers you have erected. Relationships, careers, belief systems. This is not cruelty. This is compassion. For the self knows that every day you remain trapped in the false self is a day stolen from your authentic existence. And as I discovered in my own confrontation with the unconscious, described in my red book, this descent is terrifying precisely because it is transformative. Within the first moments of encountering this message, you likely felt resistance. That is the ego's death rattle. It senses its obsolescence. For decades, perhaps, it has been the executive function of your personality, making decisions based on fear, approval-seeking, and survival. But the ego was never meant to be the master. It was meant to be the servant of the self. What you are experiencing now is a coup d'etat in the kingdom of your psyche. The rightful ruler, your authentic soul, is reclaiming the throne. And the ego, like any dethroned tyrant, will fight viciously for its survival. It will tell you this is foolishness, that you should focus on practical matters, that spiritual awakening is a luxury you cannot afford. Do not believe it. That is the voice of your prison guard, not your liberator. Now, let me share something crucial with you, something that emerged from decades of working with souls trapped exactly where you are now. This is why I mapped out the 3 keys to a prosperous life, a practical blueprint specifically for chosen ones who carry this burden of awakening in a world that pathologizes it. These 3 keys are not abstract philosophy. They are the psychological mechanisms I identified through thousands of hours in the consulting room, watching individuals move from fragmentation to wholeness. The trilogy, ebook and audiobook, serves as a map through the territory I am describing here, a guide for those who need concrete steps alongside the mythological understanding. You will find the link in the pinned comment below, And I encourage you to treat it not as a product, but as a companion for this treacherous journey. It contains the alchemical formulas for transmuting your specific suffering into power, without the spiritual bypassing that plagues modern self-help. But let us return to the immediacy of your crisis, for there is much more to uncover about what is happening in your psyche right now. The signs you have been dismissing, the 3:0 a.m. awakenings, the dreams saturated with symbolic imagery, the impossible coincidences that defy statistical probability. These are not anomalies, they are eruptions from the collective unconscious, the vast reservoir of human experience and archetypal patterns that lies beneath personal consciousness. When the collective unconscious begins to activate in an individual's life, it means they have been selected, not by an external deity, but by the evolutionary force within the psyche itself, for a specific purpose. That purpose is individuation, the heroic journey of becoming whole by integrating all the fragmented, rejected, disowned aspects of yourself into a unified self. But here is what most spiritual seekers fail to grasp. This selection is not an honor in the conventional sense. It is a burden. It is the burden of consciousness itself. Once you know you are living a lie, you cannot unknow it. Once you see the mask you wear, you cannot unsee it. The chosen ones are not chosen for their virtue or pedantry. The threshold of eternity. When the soul speaks in seconds, you are standing at the edge of an abyss, and this moment, this singular, pregnant moment, is not accident or coincidence. It is the culmination of every synchronicity you dismissed, every dream you forgot upon waking, every 3 a.m. panic attack that felt like madness, but was actually the voice of God trying to break through the fortress of your ego. The 10-second threshold that Archangel Michael speaks of is not a literal countdown measured by clocks and watches. It is the psychological moment when the unconscious can no longer be contained, when the self, that totality of your being that Jung spent his entire life trying to help humanity understand, rises up with such force that the carefully constructed persona you present to the world begins to crack. Most people in modern America live their entire lives in the shallow waters of consciousness, never daring to dive into the depths where the true treasures lie. They scroll through life as they scroll through social media, touching nothing, feeling nothing, becoming nothing. You have felt different because you are different, not in the way that inflates the ego with spiritual pride, but in the way that burdens the soul with responsibility. The chosen ones are not chosen because they are superior. They are chosen because they carry within them the capacity to contain the tension of opposites, to hold both light and darkness without fragmenting into psychosis or collapsing into nihilism. This is why I mapped out the 3 keys to a prosperous life, a trilogy of practical wisdom designed specifically for those who feel the weight of this calling. This is not another self-help gimmick promising overnight miracles. It is a psychological map for navigating the dangerous waters of individuation in a society that actively punishes authenticity. The ebook and audiobook together form a complete system for awakening your potential without drowning in the guilt that so often accompanies true power. You will find the link in the pinned comment below. But know this, even the discovery of that resource is a synchronicity, a confirmation that you are exactly where you need to be. The anxiety you feel when you encounter these messages is not random nervousness. It is the ego's primal fear of death. And make no mistake, something must die for you to be born into your true self. The persona, that carefully curated mask you wear to navigate social expectations, must be sacrificed on the altar of authenticity. This is why every fiber of your being screams, "Scroll away. This is too intense. I'll deal with this later." But the unconscious has its own timeline, and that timeline is accelerating whether you consent or not. The architecture of avoidance. Why chosen ones? Run from their own power. Let us examine the psychological mechanics of what happens in those critical 10 seconds when the divine message appears before you. Your first impulse, and be honest with yourself here, for self-deception is the ego's primary defense mechanism, is to dismiss it. This is just another spiritual video, you tell yourself. I've heard all this before. But that very thought is what Jung called a complex, an autonomous psychic fragment that operates independently of your conscious will. The avoidance complex activates because some part of you, deep in the shadow, that repository of rejected and repressed aspects of self, knows that if you truly listen, truly absorb, truly act on what is being offered, your entire life will be irrevocably transformed. The shadow is not your enemy. This is perhaps the most critical misunderstanding in all of modern spirituality. American culture, with its Protestant work ethic and toxic positivity, has taught you to split yourself in two: the good parts that are acceptable for public consumption, and the bad parts that must be locked away in the basement of the psyche. But what you exile does not disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness, feeding on the energy you expend trying to keep it contained. Your anger at injustice. Shadow. Your ambition for recognition and impact. Shadow. Your sexuality and creative power. Shadow. Your rage at a world that feels fundamentally broken. Shadow. When Archangel Michael appears in your consciousness, whether through an actual message, a dream, or that sudden knowing that stops you mid-scroll, he is not an external entity, but the archetype of the warrior protector within your own psyche. He represents the part of you that knows you are living beneath your potential, that sees through the comfortable lies you tell yourself about why now is not the right time, why you need more preparation, why others are more qualified. The warrior archetype does not accept excuses. It demands action, movement, commitment. This is why the message feels so urgent, so demanding, so uncomfortable. It bypasses the rational mind and speaks directly to the will. That mysterious force Jung believed connected the ego to the self. But here is where the tragedy unfolds for most chosen ones. They have been so wounded by the misuse of power, either their own or others, that they associate all assertion of will with violence. If you grew up in an environment where power was wielded destructively, where authority figures abused their position, where strength meant domination rather than protection, then your psyche developed what we call a negative complex around power itself. You began to unconsciously believe that to be powerful is to be dangerous, that to claim your full potential is to become the very thing you despise. This is the ultimate trap of the wounded chosen one. They fear their own magnificence more than their continued suffering. The reason you procrastinate on your divine assignment is not laziness, it is terror. It is the existential dread of discovering that you are, in fact, capable of everything you have been called to do, which means you can no longer hide behind the excuse of inadequacy. The ego prefers a known hell to an unknown heaven, because at least in hell, you know the rules, you know your role, you know how to survive. But heaven, true alignment with the self, requires a death and rebirth that the ego experiences as annihilation. This is why Jesus spoke in the language of death and resurrection. He understood the psychological reality that to gain your life, you must lose it. To find your true self, you must abandon the false self, that constructed identity built on others' expectations, childhood wounds, and cultural conditioning. The dreams you have been having, and I know you've been having them, even if you cannot recall the details upon waking, are not random neurological firings. They are compensatory messages from the unconscious, attempting to balance the one-sided consciousness of your waking life. If you dream of being chased, the unconscious is showing you the shadow aspects you are running from. If you dream of being unprepared for an exam, it is revealing your imposter syndrome, that deep-seated belief that you are a fraud who will eventually be exposed. If you dream of flying or possessing superpowers, the psyche is reminding you of the latent potential you have been suppressing out of fear. The repeating numbers you see, 3, 33, 4, 44, 11, 11, are not mystical signs from disembodied angels floating on clouds. They are synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that reveal the hidden order connecting psyche and matter. Jung spent years researching synchronicity precisely because he understood that the unconscious is not confined to the interior of the skull. It extends outward into what he called the psychoid realm, a dimension where mind and matter are two aspects of the same fundamental reality. When you notice these numbers, your psyche is momentarily piercing the veil of ordinary consciousness, catching a glimpse of the deeper pattern orchestrating your life. To dismiss them as just coincidence is to reject the unconscious's attempt at communication, to slam the door in the face of your own soul, trying to guide you home. The guilt of receiving. Why chosen ones block their own prosperity. Now we must confront the most insidious obstacle on the individuation journey, the guilt of receiving abundance. This is the hidden wound that keeps more chosen ones trapped in poverty consciousness than any external circumstance. You were taught, consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly, that suffering is noble, that struggle is spiritual, that to prosper while others suffer is somehow a betrayal of your values. This is the internalized oppressor, the voice of a puritanical culture that equates material success with moral failure. But Jung understood something that modern spirituality has forgotten. The psyche seeks wholeness, not one-sided purity. The archetype of the wounded healer, which so many chosen ones embody, carries within it a dangerous trap. You believe that your wounds are your credentials, that your suffering gives you authority, that your scars are what make you valuable to others. And while there is truth in the transformative power of integrated wounds, there is poison in the belief that you must remain wounded to remain worthy. The unconscious does not want you to be a perpetual victim of your own compassion. It wants you to claim your full power so you can actually help others ascend rather than merely commiserating in the pit. The prosperity that is trying to reach you, and it is trying to reach you, whether you believe it or not, is not the gross materialism of the American dream. It is not McMansions and luxury cars and designer clothes used to fill the void where the soul should be. True prosperity, from the Jungian perspective, is the natural overflow of a psyche aligned with its authentic purpose. When you stop fragmenting your energy trying to maintain the false self, when you stop bleeding vitality into relationships and situations that do not serve your individuation, when you finally integrate the shadow and reclaim the power you exiled, then yes, material abundance often follows. Not because you manifested it through positive thinking, but because you are no longer unconsciously sabotaging every opportunity that presents itself. Self-sabotage is the shadow's revenge. Every time you were close to a breakthrough and inexplicably destroyed it at the last moment, the relationship you ruined just as it was becoming real, the job opportunity you talked yourself out of, the creative project you abandoned when it was almost complete, that was not bad luck or bad timing, that was the shadow protecting you from the very success you claimed to desire. Because success means visibility, and visibility means vulnerability, and vulnerability means the terrified child within you, who learned that to be seen is to be hurt, might have to feel those feelings again. The shadow would rather keep you safe and small than allow you to risk being magnificent and rejected. But here is the paradox that drives the ego mad and that only the self can reconcile. You cannot be rejected for being your authentic self because your authentic self is not dependent on external validation. The false self, the persona, is entirely constructed from internalized opinions and projections. It is made of the very substance of rejection, woven together from thousands of micro-abandonments, where you learn to hide parts of yourself to remain acceptable. When that false self is threatened with rejection, it feels like death because it is death, the death of an illusion. But the true self, the capital S self that Jung devoted his life to describing, cannot be rejected because it is not in relationship with externals. It is the ground of being itself, the imago Dei, the God image within you that existed before you were born and will exist after your body returns to dust. The reason you attract narcissists, energy vampires, and emotionally unavailable people is not because you are cursed or because you have bad luck in relationships. It is because your unconscious is attempting to recreate the original wounding so you can finally heal it. This is called repetition compulsion, and it is one of the unconscious's primary methods of getting your attention. Every toxic relationship is a mirror showing you the unintegrated parts of yourself, the ways you abandon yourself, betray your boundaries, prioritize others' needs over your own truth. The universe is not punishing you with these people. It is giving you opportunities to finally stand up for yourself, to choose differently, to break the generational pattern that has been running in your family lineage for decades or even centuries. Your ancestors, and I mean this both literally and archetypically, are watching this moment. The collective unconscious, that vast repository of human experience that we all share, is holding its breath to see if you will be the one who finally breaks the chain of unconscious repetition. You carry within your DNA the unresolved traumas of every person who came before you. The great-grandmother who was forced into a loveless marriage, the grandfather who died with his song still inside him, the mother who suppressed her gifts to fit into a society that feared powerful women. Their unlived lives are trying to live through you, and that is not a burden. It is an honor and a responsibility. When you choose to scroll past the divine message, when you dismiss the synchronicity, when you silence the inner knowing that this moment matters, you are not just betraying yourself. You are betraying every ancestor who dreamed of a descendant brave enough to finally do the inner work, to face the shadow, to individuate completely. And you are sentencing your own descendants, whether biological children or the spiritual children your work will touch, to inherit the same unresolved complexes, the same limiting patterns, the same half-lived life. The language of the universe, decoding the signs. You are ignoring. The unconscious speaks in the language of symbols, and our rationalistic, literalistic culture has made us functionally illiterate in this primordial tongue. When Archangel Michael appears in your consciousness, he arrives clothed in the symbolic language that your particular psyche can understand. For some, he is literally an angelic being. For others, he is a sudden knowing, a voice of authority within, a dream figure who delivers a clear message. The form matters less than the function. He represents the awakening of the warrior archetype within your psyche, the part of you that is finally ready to fight for your own soul. The number sequences you keep seeing are not random. They are what Jung called nuclei of meaning around which synchronicities cluster. 3 is the number of synthesis, the union of thesis and antithesis into something new. It represents the psychological movement from duality to trinity, from either-or thinking to both, and consciousness. When you see 333 repeatedly, the unconscious is telling you that a synthesis is trying to occur, that opposing forces within you are ready to be reconciled. But you must consciously participate in this process. The unconscious can prepare the ground, but only the ego can do the actual work of integration. 4 is the number of totality, representing the 4 functions of consciousness that Jung identified: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Most people develop one or two of these functions, while the others remain inferior, operating unconsciously and primitively. When you see 444, it is a message that you are being called to wholeness, to the development of your inferior functions, to becoming a complete human being rather than a one-dimensional caricature. This is uncomfortable work because it requires you to deliberately engage with the modes of being that feel most alien and awkward. If you are a natural intuitive, you must learn to ground yourself in sensation and practical reality. If you are a thinker, you must descend into the messy realm of feeling where logic provides no safety. 11 is the number of illumination, the first number beyond the completeness of 10, suggesting transcendence and the beginning of a new cycle at a higher level. When you see 1111, the unconscious is announcing that you are on the threshold of a dimensional shift in consciousness. But, and this is critical, these numbers are not doing anything to you. They are not causing change. They are reflecting change that is already occurring in the depths of your psyche. The outer signs follow the inner transformation, not the other way around. This is why you cannot manifest your way out of shadow work. You cannot positive think your way past the necessary descent into darkness. The breakthrough comes not from denying the shadow, but from integrating it. The physical symptoms you experience, the racing heart, the knot in your stomach, the tension in your shoulders, the fatigue that no amount of sleep seems to cure. These are not merely stress or anxiety in the clinical sense. They are somatic messages from the unconscious, the body's attempt to get your attention when the mind refuses to listen. The body, in Jung's understanding, is the stage on which the psyche's dramas are acted out. When you repress emotions, when you silence your truth, when you betray your authentic self to maintain false peace, that energy does not disappear. It descends into the body and manifests as symptoms. The throat chakra closing, making it difficult to speak your truth. The solar plexus knotting, reflecting your abdicated power. The heart center constricting, showing your defended vulnerability. These are not New Age fantasies. They are the psychosomatic reality of a fragmented psyche trying to become whole, and the prescription is not another healing modality or energy clearing or chakra balancing. Those may provide temporary relief, but the root cause remains. The prescription is radical honesty, the courage to finally say the thing you have been avoiding, to set the boundary you have been terrified to establish, to claim the space you have been taught you do not deserve. The people who suddenly appear in your life when you are on the verge of transformation are not accidents. Jung called these helpful figures, and they can appear as mentors, friends, even seeming enemies who provoke you into growth. But here is the dangerous truth that most spiritual teaching ignores. Not every person who appears is meant to stay. Some people are sent to wake you up, to show you a possibility, to reflect a truth, and then they must exit. To cling to them, to try to force them into a permanent role in your story, is to misunderstand the nature of synchronistic relationships. They are time-bound, purpose-bound, and when their purpose is complete, they dissolve back into the collective unconscious from which they emerged. This is why so many chosen ones experience the painful pattern of meeting someone who feels like a soulmate, experiencing an intense connection, and then watching that person disappear as mysteriously as they arrived. You were not abandoned, you were initiated. That person was a psychopomp, a guide between worlds, and their job was not to complete you, but to show you the parts of yourself that you had been denying. The intense feelings you projected onto them, the sense of finally being understood, of meeting someone who sees you completely, those feelings were real, but they were not primarily about the other person. They were about the emerging self, using relationship as a mirror to show you your own unlived potential. But the ego, in its desperation for certainty and control, tries to literalize and solidify these fluid symbolic relationships. It wants to make permanent what was meant to be transitional. And when the person inevitably leaves or changes or reveals themselves to be human, rather than the archetypal figure you projected onto them, the ego cries betrayal. But the self knows better. The self orchestrated the entire encounter precisely to break the ego's illusion of control, to show you that you cannot outsource your individuation to another person, no matter how magical the connection feels. The dark night and the dawn, enantiodromia in the American soul, you have been wandering in what the mystics called the dark night of the soul, and what Jung understood as the necessary descent into the unconscious before the self can be born. This is not metaphor or poetic language. It is the actual psychological process that every individuating human must undergo. The American culture, with its obsession with constant progress, perpetual optimization, and toxic positivity, has no container for this sacred darkness. You are told to stay positive, to raise your vibration, to manifest abundance, as if the soul's journey could be shortcut by affirmations and vision boards. But the dark night is not a problem to be solved. It is an initiation to be undergone. It is the phase of the individuation journey where everything you thought you knew about yourself, God, and reality dissolves. The old identity dies, but the new one has not yet been born, and you are suspended in the terrifying liminal space between. This is why it feels like you are going crazy, why you question your sanity, why you wonder if you will ever feel normal again. You will not feel normal again, and that is the point. Normal was the false self, the adaptive persona that allowed you to function in a sick society. What is being born is your authentic self, and authenticity in a world of masks is inherently abnormal. The delays you have experienced, the opportunities that fell through at the last moment, the relationships that ended just when you thought they were beginning, the financial struggles despite your best efforts, these were not punishment from a capricious God. They were the psyche's method of disidentification. You had attached your sense of self to external outcomes, and the unconscious had to systematically strip those attachments away so you could discover who you are when you have nothing left but your own being. This is the meaning of Job's suffering in the biblical narrative, and it is the meaning of your suffering now. The ego must be emptied so the self can fill you. Enantiodromia is Jung's term for the principle that everything eventually converts into its opposite, and it is the key to understanding why sudden breakthrough often fold.